Donald Goins is your favorite rapper's favorite writer. A pimp and a stick-up man addicted to heroin most of his short life, Goins' books with titles like Whoreson, Dopefiend, Black Gangster have sold over 6 million copies. Written in a frenzy between 70 and 74, Goins' novels are a dark portal into street life and the misery of addiction and are probably the most widely read set of books in the American prison system. Other than the streets itself, he's probably the single biggest inspiration to gangster rap music, $1 billion business. And while Goins ended up with a criminal record for pimping, armed robbery, bootlegging liquor, and drugs, he actually grew up in a relatively affluent family in one of America's most thriving black neighborhoods. So we're here on Victor in Orleans on the east side of Detroit, and this is where Donald Goins grew up. This is where a lot of the stories that inspired rap music and have sold millions of copies. He got ideas from this neighborhood around here, which, believe it or not, was at one time a thriving neighborhood in Detroit. This is the next neighborhood over from an area called Coney Gardens, which is a little bit east, one of the wealthiest African-American neighborhoods in the entire United States. And on Victor Street here is where Donald Goins' family owned a dry cleaners. It was really successful, and they built another one around the corner. The Goins family owned 4 houses in a row. They lived together, they played together. His father, Joe, was a gambler, possibly involved in the numbers. He was hanging out with Joe Louis, and when Donald Goins was a kid, he would go over to Joe Louis's house. So this neighborhood is probably 95% or 99% depopulated from what it once was when Donald Goins was growing up here. All these side streets were packed with houses, packed with little businesses, many of them black owned, and that's the world Donald Goins inhabited when he was growing up. Bars, pool halls, and as you can see now, it's pretty much nothing left. So Goins' family was like the Jeffersons. They had a mini dry cleaning empire in Detroit, and I'm sure Donald's father wanted to bring his son into the business, but Donald had other plans. After getting kicked out of Catholic school, he dropped out in the 9th grade and joined the Air Force just in time for the Korean War.
The well-equipped North Korean army struck in force, pushed across the border, overran the South Korean defenses, and plunged the nation into war.
Goins came home from the military with 2 newfound hobbies that he picked up in Asia: heroin and prostitutes. He spent the next 15 years shooting heroin, pimping, doing stick-ups. He went to federal prison for manufacturing bootleg liquor and state prison for robbing a numbers house. He once stuck up a bingo hall that his own mother was at. He spent most of the 60s in prison, and he missed the Detroit riot of 67. He was locked up. In 69, he read the bestseller Pimp, written by Iceberg Slim, and decided to start writing himself. Goins quickly got himself a publishing deal with Holloway House, the same publisher as Iceberg Slim, and in a drug-fueled frenzy, he pumped out 15 books in just 5 years, between 70 and 74.
You know, growing up, we definitely always had Donald Goins books in the house. My mother read Donald Goins, my father read it, you know, amongst other things. But going to prison, I had no drive to read. There was no reason. I didn't read comic books at home. I didn't like the newspaper. In prison, the only way to like get a young wild guy to even adhere or think reading is fun, you know, good for you, is to give him something that he's interested in reading. So one of the first books I was given in prison was Street Players.
I read Dopefiend. I think I did something silly being young in the county jail, right? And I came to find out everybody reads Donald Goins. Everybody gets locked up, reads Donald Goins.
And when I read it, I was like, oh my God, you know, because it was the streets. I was reading about streets of Detroit. I felt like if I read the dictionary, I'd be smart. But then I read the dictionary and ended up just rapping words out of the dictionary. I didn't have the knowledge, but reading Donald Goins books helped me get interested in actually reading other books than just Donald Goins. Donald Goins seemed to be the #1 going book in prison. any book pertaining to, like, you know, Black Panthers or the Muslims or white supremacy or, you know, Aztec pride.
Contraband.
Contraband. It's considered contraband because it's a threat to security.
But Donald Goins wasn't.
But Donald Goins wasn't. And what the administration to me didn't get is that Donald Goins was like watching a movie.
So here's my 1 degree of separation with Donald Goins. I did a documentary called Motown Mafia about one of the biggest drug rings in Detroit history, run by 2 men, Eddie Jackson and Courtney Brown, who became the city's biggest heroin dealers during the same time Goins was writing.
You know, their crew ran Detroit from basically from 69 to 77 when they all went away to federal prison. That was the same era where Donald Goins is doing a lot of his writings.
So he takes us over to Donald Goins' apartment in Highland Park. He's a street guy. You know, he talks shit, but he wasn't arrogant or none of that madness who you think he might be. No, he didn't have no money. Not what we call money. You know, he's surviving.
So Eddie Jackson becomes cocaine snorting buddies with Goins at the height of Goins' fame, right before he got killed, and Courtney Brown Sr., whom I've become friends with, along with his son, can vividly remember meeting Goins when he was a celebrity writer, living it up on Eddie Jackson's free cocaine.
Yeah, they could afford it, you getting kilos of cocaine. That's just for pleasure. Then they were getting what they call flakes from the pharmaceutical companies, cocaine, but way more expensive than cocaine from the streets.
October 21st, 1974, Goins and his girlfriend are found murdered in their Highland Park apartment. Both shot 5 times. The 238 pistols used to kill him left laying in the front hall, and their 2 small children left unharmed, locked in the basement. So who killed Donald Goins and Shirley Saylor? A friend of Goins claimed he overheard Goins being threatened by 3 white men with rotting teeth and stringy hair over some kind of debt. Goins' 4-year-old daughter supposedly told homicide detectives that some men came over to the apartment on the day they were killed wearing blue uniforms like police.
The 750 murders last year was a record for Detroit, murder capital of the country. Detroit's murder rate is twice that of New York and Chicago. It is 4 times that of some cities.
Goins' killing could have been caused by an unpaid drug debt, a robbery he was involved in, who knows? And probably the most interesting theory is that people in the street, the real people who inspired his stories, got revenge on Donnie for him writing about them.
I'm reading the book and there's the character, the fat man, there's another character, Donna Jean, a character named Rudolph, and it became very obvious that Donald Goins was borrowing bits and pieces from his connection with Eddie Jackson. My barber growing up, and the gentleman who actually also went to jail on the case with Eddie and my father, he used to cut Stonewall's, and you said Stonewall was the conduit that introduced Eddie to Donald Goins?
To Donald Goins.
He cut Stonewall's hair, and again, a lot of the guys who hustled with them were pimps.
And Stonewall came out 2 or 3 times.
And and my barber tells me that he spoke with Stonewall, and when after Stonewall wrote the book, which later was published, he was getting messages from the streets like there are people who you mentioned in your book who are not happy with you telling their story. Unlike Donald Goins, Stonewall was a big pimp. He paid the price for using his knowledge of the streets and the big fellas that he knew in the streets. And Stonewall, right after he got a publishing deal, he ended up getting assassinated. Well, I was just thinking when you were saying it, I was like, other crews might not have been as benevolent as Eddie and the old man and them. It may not have took it
personal.
May have took it more personal, or
he wasn't in that guy. He wasn't that type of guy. I mean, he was an intellectual guy, but he just liked getting high.
Goins' books have made tens of millions of dollars and will probably make even more as time goes on, but More than anything, his legacy lives on in the billions of dollars generated by gangster rap music. Some of it real, most of it fake, and all of it sounding like something Donald himself could have written.
Everybody from every city, every state, every sale pretty much, everybody had a Donald Goins book. I didn't like to read, and reading Donald Goins in prison, reading Donald Goins actually made me enjoy reading, and that to this day, that played a big part in me making music. The thing about Donald Goins is you knew that it was fictional, but it was so real. It was so, if he's saying this happened on Woodward, you kind of like, did that really happen on Woodward? Or
I think a lot of guys got exposed to that life from reading Donald Goins. That is what a lot of people actually talk about. Yeah, your rappers. A lot of them know more about the streets from reading Donald Goins than they know about the streets from actually living it. I mean, the average guy talking about selling kilos or moving the package on these rap songs, you know, has never sold a nickel bag of weed, you know, or that's the max that he knows. But he has read all of Donald Goins' books. He knows of the attitude that Donald Goins talks about and some of the violence and how the streets operate. And they've incorporated Donald Goins' literature into their lifestyle. So it was almost like he was the producer for a lot of rap music, yeah.
you can hear Donald Goins in a lot of rap, especially with a guy, no disrespect, I don't know Rick Ross, but he's using somebody else's persona to sell records, and I believe a lot of MCs do that.
You know, you knew when you saw the dope man, he was the dope man. Well, all of a sudden, guys who had regular 9-to-5 jobs started trying to dress like the dope man and drive like the dope man.
One of my favorite albums is it was written by Nas. And when Nas came up and said, "Black Girl Lost," I knew at that very moment that the only way he can know about Black Girl Lost is if he read Donald Goins. That influenced Nas, and Nas influences me. So it also made me go further into more of the Donald Goins books. Listen, man, I say this a bunch. I say this a lot. I'm a storyteller. I'm not a gangster. You know, even though I was incarcerated, I'm not a gangster. You catch me on social media, 7 the General, man. I make music. That's what I do. Look me up.
El Dorado red, sipping Dawn out the bottle. My life is like a Donald Goins novel. A Donald Goins novel.
So, was Donald Goins a great writer? Probably not. Is reading his novels a good thing for prison inmates to be doing? Maybe not. But he is an important writer. He cataloged a forgotten piece of American history with his books. He gave us a real record of street life in the 60s and 70s. A life that millions of people lived and whose voices were rarely heard. And tens of millions of guys from the inner city's first or only exposure to books was through Donald Goins, and in a way that puts him high up in the rarest air of literary giants. Goins' life, times, and death is also something of a referendum on the American dream. As you read the twisted tales he spun in his heroin days, pecking away at the typewriter, remember that Donnie Goins was the child of the American dream. He grew up in a nice house with parents that owned their own thriving business. There were new cars, trips, clothes, Catholic school, but that wasn't fulfilling, just like it isn't for a lot of people in America. So he looked to the streets, to drugs, for meaning. And that still resonates today. Lost souls looking for meaning in life. People that society threw away, or people that couldn't find meaning in the soulless blur of work, mortgage payments, and going to the mall. And remember, the next time you see some rapper on television babbling about his drug transactions and his murderous ways, he's probably just the imitation of an imitation. Donald Goins was the real thing.